Good morning. Here begins something new. I'm Charles Kuralt, and this is Sunday Morning, a 90-minute CBS News program that starts right now. Every Sunday morning, we're going to bring you the news, of course, but we're going to spend most of this hour and a half together trying to explain what's happening to ourselves and to you. And we're not going to hurry through it. We have time for a background story on a major event, so we'll have a background story every week. We have time to talk about art and music and books and movies, so we'll do that. Sports, of course. And we'll even deal each week with a subject that television rarely talks about, television. There will be serious essays on religion and learning and science, business, the environment. We'll tell you what to expect from the weather in the week ahead. And every week, I'm going to sit down over there and talk with the CBS News correspondents who are covering the big stories, wherever in the world the news finds them, to see if we can make some sense of where we've been during the past week and where we're going. Right now, we're going to the news headlines for this first edition of Sunday Morning, January 28, 1979. China's Vice Premier Deng Xiaoping is en route to Washington for a 9-day visit to the United States. Iran's exiled leader, Ayatollah Khomeini, says if Prime Minister Bakhtiar wants to meet him in Paris, Bakhtiar will have to resign first. Pope John Paul, on his visit to Mexico, has urged Latin American Catholics to keep the traditional faith. A United Airlines jumbo jet flying from Los Angeles to New York was hijacked. Police have seized the woman hijacker. All 131 aboard are safe. And President Carter leads the nation in mourning the death of Nelson Rockefeller. Funeral services for the former vice president who died at 70 will be held Monday. Some notes on this week's news. President Carter's $532 billion budget message sets the stage for a real confrontation in this country. He's made nearly everybody mad. About a fourth of the Carter tax dollar would be spent on defense, not enough for some conservatives. Twice that amount would be spent on education and health and social services, but that's not enough for liberals because there would be cuts in Social Security benefits to widows and children and other social programs. In his State of the Union address, Mr. Carter called for a new foundation, control of inflation, easing of international tensions through an arms treaty with the Russians. On this, he tried to reassure the conservative doubters in Congress.
Our deterrent is overwhelming, and I will sign no agreement unless our deterrent force will remain overwhelming.
Midweek, John Connally, former Secretary of the Treasury, Governor of Texas, ex-Democrat, tossed his Stetson into the ring for the Republican nomination for president in 1980. And John Connally left no doubt what the target of his campaign would be.
I know you expect to hear some criticism of the Democrat in the White House. And in that, you're not going to be disappointed.
The Republicans picked Detroit as the site for their 1980 convention, a victory, apparently, for former President Gerald Ford. Detroit, of course, is in his home state. The significance of that was not lost on Detroit's mayor, Coleman Young.
The location of convention is a very important consideration in terms of who wins the damn election in 1980.
Gunfire again this week in the streets of Iran. Anti-government demonstrators once again being killed by the military. The Prime Minister, Shapur Bakhtiar, says he's going to Paris to see if he can persuade the exiled religious leader, Ayatollah Khomeini, to call off the demonstrations. But Khomeini hasn't agreed to see him unless he first resigns. Khomeini wants to go to Iran to take over, but Bakhtiar won't open the airports to let him in. So it's still a standoff this morning, and the threat of civil war in Iran is still real. Another traveler, China's Vice Premier Deng Xiaoping, is in the air right now on his way to Washington. Earlier this month, United States recognition of China was cause for celebration in Peking, where Deng honored American officials. Now it's Deng's turn to be toasted.
See you in the United States.
Still another traveler, John Paul II, made a journey to the New World. His first stop was the Dominican Republic. Then on to Mexico to attend a conference of bishops. It's a historic trip for at least two reasons. It's the first foreign travel for Pope John Paul II. It's also the first test of his reign. Mexico, though predominantly Catholic, is a country which has a strong anti-clerical tradition. Every week we're going to have a cover story reported by Richard Threlkeld. This Sunday, the subject is the Pope in Mexico, and Richard Threlkeld's on the scene in Mexico City with a preview. Good morning, Richard.
Good morning, Charlie. That is our cover story this morning, the visit from Mexico City of Pope John Paul II to this part of the Third World, to Mexico. In just a little bit, we'll be showing you the crowds, the color, the ceremony that surrounded him here, and we'll be looking behind all that at some of the deep divisions in the Latin American church, the wounds in the faith the Pope has come here to try to heal.
We'll be back to Dick Threlkeld later, and we'll deal with some of those other subjects at greater length. But just here, a word about Nelson Rockefeller. He never got what he most wanted out of politics. At the end of his life, he turned full-time to art. Politics is fleeting, art endures. In modern art, he preferred abstraction, as he once explained to Walter Cronkite.
The nice thing about abstract art, to my way of thinking, is you don't have to try and understand it. You just let your imagination run. If it's a subject that is representational, you get it intellectually, and then you know it. And each time you look at it, it's some scene, you know the scene, and you finally get you don't look at it. If it's an abstract thing, then each time you see it, depending on your mood, you have a different interpretation of what it was. And so it stops you and arrests your attention.
He loved modern art, but not just modern art, also primitive art. He gave such a wealth of primitive art to the Metropolitan Museum that they had to build a new wing to contain it. He loved Mexican art and Japanese art, and he collected it all with boundless enthusiasm and perfect taste. And if the world forgets that Nelson Rockefeller was ever governor of New York and vice president of the United States, it will never forget the exquisite collection of art that will always bear his name. The last great controversy of Nelson Rockefeller's life was an artistic one. He started selling reproductions of some of his paintings and sculpture. The Art Dealers Association set up a howl. Originals might be priceless, the art dealers said, but copies are worthless. Nelson Rockefeller replied in so many words that if from a few feet away you can't tell the difference between an original and a reproduction, then their artistic value is obviously the same. Same form, same color, same beauty. So the argument really wasn't about art, it was about money. Money was a subject Nelson Rockefeller knew more about than the art dealers. He may have known more about art, too. The best of the network sports reporters doesn't do play-by-play. He observes from a decent distance. This gives him a chance to think, which is unusual. Ray Gandolf will be thinking out loud for us every Sunday morning. Ray, what's on your mind?
Charles, it was sad Saturday for half the top 10 college basketball teams in the country. Maybe they were thinking about their studies. Top-ranked Notre Dame lost by a point to Maryland. Number 2 North Carolina lost by 5 to Clemson. Northwestern, last in its conference, beat 4th-ranked Michigan State by 18 points. Michigan beat 8th-ranked Illinois at the buzzer, and Georgia upset number 9 Louisiana State. In the NBA, Seattle beat Houston, Atlanta beat San Antonio, and San Diego beat Cleveland. In the National Hockey League, the New York Rangers handed the Islanders their first home ice defeat of the season in 24 games. Montreal beat Boston, Pittsburgh beat Los Angeles, Minnesota beat Philadelphia, Vancouver and Colorado tied, Washington beat Chicago, Buffalo beat Detroit. Of the names in the news last week, the biggest name made the nicest story. Willie Mays was elected to baseball's Hall of Fame in his first year of eligibility. These pictures show him in his twilight years as a New York Met. The sunshine years, of course, were with the Giants. Dave Parker of the Pittsburgh Pirates, who may be the best all-around ball player since Willie Mays, signed a new 5-year contract believed to be worth close to $5 million, much more than Mays earned in his lifetime. Rod Carew, the 7-time American League batting champion, will be leaving the Minnesota Twins, and the Yankees, who have enough players to satisfy the Twins and enough money to satisfy Carew, are expected to land him any day now. And any day now, Steve Cawthon will win another race. But right now, the first $6 million jockey, after 8 more losses yesterday at Santa Anita, has not had a winner in his last 97 races. And that's about as bad as Rod Carew going 0 for 97 at bats. Charles?
Ray Gandolf, who'll be back later in our broadcast with a different kind of look at the Super Bowl phenomenon. Someday, if you are in the right place, and if you are lucky, you will look up and see an eagle on the wing. It's a sight to stop your heart. I've seen bald eagles in Alaska where they're threatened, and in Wyoming where they are threatened, and in New England where they are threatened to the edge of extinction. The national bird is an endangered species. Lem Tucker has been in Maine looking at eagles.
Eagles have always fascinated people. Ancient Romans worshiped them. Isaiah admonished that those who waited upon the Lord would mount up with wings as eagles. Unique to North America is the bald eagle. Since 1782, even before there was a Constitution, it has stood as the symbol of the United States. No thanks to Ben Franklin, who thought the bird of prey of such terrible moral character that he pushed for the turkey as the nation's emblem. Usually wise old Ben lost that one, and so in one form or another, the bald eagle has come to mean the United States of America. Once there were tens of thousands of them, and no one seems to know just when their numbers began declining, but since World War II, they have disappeared at a devastating rate. Partly because what is often good for men, or at least seems so at the time, is disastrous for wildlife. Take pesticides, especially DDT. After years of use, it began to permeate the food chain of eagles. Before long, their bodies were so contaminated that mating for some produced only infertile eggs. Others gave up even trying. This is Cobb's Cook Bay in Maine. In one way or another, more than 25% of all the bald eagles left in the northeastern United States depend on the land in and around this area for their own survival. That's because this is one of the few shoreline areas still relatively undisturbed by man. But now, men and eagles are engaged in a fight for this area, and so far, the eagles are winning. 6 years ago, the Pittston Company, annual sales $1.5 billion, owner of Brinks Armored Car Company, coal mines, and a retail oil business, decided it wanted to build a refinery at Eastport, Maine, right on Cobb's Cook Bay. It took 4 years to win the okay from Maine's Environmental Agency, which came over the objections of some environmentalists. They worried about oil spills from large tankers, which would have to maneuver their way through narrow channels and some of the country's most treacherous tides. And an oil spill here, they said, would endanger all wildlife. Despite that, Maine said yes. The Federal Environmental Protection Agency issued Pittston 1 permit, and only one more was needed. 2 weeks ago, it was denied, citing a threat to the continued existence of the bald eagle in the northeastern United States. Another roadblock for Pittston, and an unwarranted one, says Vice President Arnold Colicus.
We're very disappointed in that action. We believe that we are not endangering or threatening the eagle or its habitat.
Well, now, you're not dealing now with... this is no snail darter. This is no furbished lousewort, which is another one of those creatures none of us heard of.
No, because I'm sure you understand that the eagles exist in great quantities in the northwest of the U.S. and in Alaska. And thus, even if there were some impact on the area in which we're talking, the species would not be eliminated.
Also unhappy, the city manager of Eastport.
Well, human beings are in danger, too. They're becoming an endangered species when the eagle means more than jobs and a decent standard of living for the people who live around here. I mean, there's got to be a priority somewhere, and it's got to be sensible.
This is part of Baxter's concern. An old city. Once 5,500 people lived here, today about 2,000. It is the easternmost point in the continental United States, and even during its good times, when its fishing industry thrived, not many people wanted to be here. Because one reason this area is so ideal for eagles is that it is still pretty much as it was 100 years ago. The refinery, say some Eastport residents, would mean time no longer passes Eastport by. But even environmentalists are not jubilant over the Eagle decision.
I'm delighted that they decided to block it, but I think that there's a danger in people thinking that the Eagle's the only reason. If there's an oil spill, the way the currents work off the Maine coast, currents take it right in along close to the coast, which means it's going to wash up along 50 miles of coast. So it's not just the Eastport economy that's going to be affected. It could be all of eastern Maine.
In your heart, do you think that decision is going to hold up?
I don't know. I fear that Pittston's going to find a way to get around it.
A few days ago, Pittston announced that it would appeal the decision. But even if it finally wins that one, Canada controls the waters leading to Eastport's harbor and so far is unwilling to permit large tankers into the area. But for now, the battle lines are here. No one denies that Pittston's $750 million investment would be a boon to Eastport's economy. That is a measurable worth. But what is this worth?
It's Sunday morning on CBS, and here again is Charles Kuralt.
Pope John Paul II received a tumultuous welcome in Mexico, but he arrives at a time when Marxist priests in Latin America have clashed openly with their superiors. The conflict is over the direction the church will take. Should the church be on the side of social reform, even violent revolution, or should the church hew to traditional spiritual goals? There's not much middle ground down there. Our cover story this morning is on the Pope's mission to Mexico, reported by Richard Threlkeld.
Hernan Cortez was the first Catholic to come to Mexico. He came as a conqueror and ruled by force of arms. Pope John Paul II is the latest Catholic to come here. He has come, he says, as a traveler of peace and love. He will need all his skills as a peacemaker, for the church here is at war with itself. But there's no doubt he has already conquered the hearts of the Mexican people. So this is our cover story this week, and it begins with some impressions.
What you remember is the people, millions and millions of people. People shouting and crying and laughing and waving and people praying and singing all over Mexico City, everywhere he was. The sight and the sound of it filled the senses and splashed forever into your memory. One man looked at him and said, "Mano, el Papa is joven, but the Pope is so young." The popes these people have always known were very old or very stern or very sad. And this Pope was smiling and strong, and his colors on the vestments he wore were their colors, the white of Veracruz and the gold of the Aztecs and the blood red of the revolutions. Not old or sad or stern, this Pope, but human, benevolent. He seemed to know all your dark sins and forgive you for them. That is what you remember from this weekend in Mexico. All the faces, the millions and millions of faces, and his face, and the face of one little girl.
On a Sunday morning at Mass, Alma Delia Ballesteros Torres, aged 4, has come to be introduced to her church and her God. It is a custom among the poor. Their children so often die young. So when a little girl reaches the age of 4, it is a time for Thanksgiving. Alma Delia is already a survivor with a future. From now on, the church will be the marrow of her life, as it is for her family, as it is for 300 million Roman Catholics in Latin America, almost half the Catholics in the world. The people of this church of Our Lady of San Miguel in the slums near Mexico City's airport came here from the countryside because life is a little better. The church is their touchstone, their solace in grief, their promise of something better in the next life. But the church never offered them much hope in this life until now. Catholicism has had a split personality in Latin America since the first Spanish missionaries landed with Cortez in Mexico 4 centuries ago. The missionaries protected the natives, tended to them, Christianized them. But the church became rich, conservative, an instrument of the soldiers and the wealthy. Eventually, Mexico, for one, had had enough. In one revolution after another, it stripped the church of its lands and its power, persecuted the clergy. Mexico does not have relations with the Vatican. It does not allow priests and nuns to wear clerical garb on the streets. Mexico officially is one of the most secular nations in the free world. Unofficially, Mexico is one of the most devout. The first citizen of every parish is the parish priest. Like Father Cesar Castaneda in the parish just around the corner. Like so many of his fellow priests, he has begun to spend less time in church and more in the neighborhoods. We decided to draw up a plan to make life better here, he says. We decided the people wanted more family counseling, more church activities. Then we asked the people what they wanted. It wasn't that at all. They wanted the streets paved, so we got some streets paved. They wanted a cooperative grocery, so now we have that. They wanted a doctor, so now we have a doctor. Father Castaneda has become a part-time priest and a full-time ward boss and social reformer. It is a communion of radical change, the clergy and their faithful struggling to make things better in the here and now. It is called the theology of liberation, and it is both a promise and a problem. In Mexico, the priests and their poor are merely fighting a sluggish bureaucracy. In El Salvador, Chile, Argentina, or as here in Nicaragua recently, it has become a sometimes violent struggle with savage dictatorships. In the last 10 years in Latin America, more than 800 priests have been arrested, expelled, tortured, murdered, or killed in combat, practicing the theology of liberation. And so now there is a struggle within the church over who is to lead the faithful and where. Conservative bishops, conservatives in the Vatican, think they are losing control of the church. They are determined to get it back at the bishops' conference in Puebla. They want the priest to spread the gospel and stop spreading revolution. And they want the Pope to help them by rapping some knuckles. But the liberationists are claiming a higher authority. Father Luis del Valle of Mexico City is one of the leaders of the movement.
Bueno, no es nada más desde Medellín.
The last 10 years of Latin American history have shown, he says, that those who chose to fight the system, those who chose to live with human dignity, have been persecuted. This is the same thing that happened to Jesus Christ. We may be a minority in the church, but we are the one part of the church that is alive.
It is a new catechism of conflict that troubles the church here. The questions are just as fundamental, but not so easy to answer as the ancient litany they teach the children. Who best obeys the words of Christ? Those clergy who follow his mandate to feed the hungry and shelter the homeless, whatever the sacrifice, or those who render unto Caesar? Questions to perplex, well, to perplex even a pope. At the Basilica of the Virgin of Guadalupe, Mexico's most holy shrine, the Pope spoke of the problems in the church here, but only gently. He did not mention those priests who have become Marxists. He said nothing of those bishops who have chosen to live and let live with the dictators. Instead, he prayed to the Virgin to guide the church according to the words of Christ. Which words he did not say. Perhaps if the Pope has a sermon to give about the theology of liberation, it will come later when he meets the bishops. Or perhaps he will stand aside and let the church here find its own way. He bears the names of 3 popes who have died. He must know that change is in the natural order of things. He knows that popes don't rule the church anymore. They are teachers who lead by example. Certainly he will pray for the future of his church, for the future of his people, and for the future of a little girl.